establishing the prayer, what does it do for us? What qualities does it bring about? It demonstrates devotion. It gives us a sense of energy and zeal, the word you mentioned earlier, which is a nice word to describe how one would feel after the prayer if they have basically prayed properly. And it gives you perspective. And fundamentally, in the end, it makes you fearless.
My episode's guest is Iqbal Nasim, an educator, speaker, and writer. Iqbal began his career as an investment banker. In 2011, he left that role and began the National Zakat Foundation. He stepped down from National Zakat Foundation in 2021, whereby he now focuses on delivering transformational educational experiences to help people live truly God-centered lives. In our conversation, we discuss how prayer is situated with respect to living a good life. We touch on the purpose of life, the nature of our relationship with God, what God intends for us by instituting prayer 5 times a day, and how that ends up benefiting our lives, both materially and spiritually. Welcome, Iqbal. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, part of the kind of what I'm doing is that I'm interested in the good life, right? And what I want to talk about today is how salah or worship kind of links into that and actually promotes living a good life. Because I think in some way this is a development on your course, which I did, the Transform My Prayer, and that was really, really good, because typically when we go through a course about prayer, like from a scholar, from the imam at the masjid, it's very fiqh based. So it's about legality and where your hands are going to be and that kind of thing, but that doesn't actually engage you. That doesn't transform your prayer, right? And I think by focusing on the psychology a lot more, it was very helpful. And what I'm trying to do is I want to start off with the axiom that God is good, and by virtue of being a good God, he wants what is good for us, and following his laws, obeying his laws, that leads to good outcomes for us, right? And he's obviously commanded us to pray 5 times a day, and he says in I think Surah Dariyat, we did not create mankind and jinn except to worship me. And I want to understand that, okay, so if he's said we're created to worship, if that even is the right translation of the word, then how does that improve our lives? So if that's a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a broad question, but we'll try and give a succinct response to begin with. So yes, so وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I haven't created jinn or the human being except that they should worship me or serve me. Personally, I prefer serve as a translation of abada ya'budu, and ibada as service, the noun. I think service is more all-encompassing. The word worship in English obviously gives us the idea of sort of devotional worship, ritual practice, which is obviously a core part, a fundamental part of the way in which we relate to God. But I think the idea of service, I think is more comprehensive. It includes a sense of kind of worship, but it also includes, if you like, what often scholars talk about is the other part of what it means to be submitted to God, which is the stewardship and the care that we take in the context of our dealings, on earth with others, with the environment, etc., as part and parcel of the whole picture. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Now, obviously, with this word here, or with this particular verse, again, it's many commentators of the past, they spoke of, or they sort of translated or explained rather the second part of the verse, in order to worship me or serve me, as also using other Arabic phrases as well. So, for example, in order to come to know me, so the idea is that actually you can't truly worship Allah or serve him in the best possible way and manifest that unless you actually, understand him well, or let's say the extent to which you're able to worship and serve will be correlated to the extent to which you are sort of understand. So understand his qualities, his attributes, purposes, wisdoms as much as possible, and then to bring that into thinking in terms of how to sort of function and in your life. Now, why does the worship of God lead to better outcomes? Well, first and foremost, because if we believe that this is truth and reality, then just as in any kind of context, functioning in a way that is mindful of the reality of the parameters, around you that are true, uh, has to be better in principle than functioning or behaving in ways that in isolation may seem okay potentially in the short term, or they may not seem particularly harmful. But if they're out of sync with the overall kind of reality of things, or the overall context, then things will go wrong. So a really kind of a trivial example might be, someone's trying to play one sport on the court of another sport, if you know what I mean, right? Like you can do it, you can start to do stuff, but at some point it doesn't sink in with the broader, reality of the actual arena in which you're in. So if the arena in which we're in, if the world in which we're in is a created world, it's been created, if you like, for us, right? And everything on earth is there for us as human beings, and effectively for us to be, and for us to exist within this kind of within this arena. I like to kind of call it just this sort of arena within these parameters, as a way for us to then come to know God, to appreciate Him, to realize that we go through this life in such a way, remaining mindful of the fact that it's not all about this life, and it's not about what we build, and this is not the end in and of itself, but it's a transitory phase where we have, the ability to, yes, enjoy what is here within the bounds, and to and to benefit from all the things here, to marvel and to wonder at the things that are around us, but not to be too vested in this world, or too distracted by by the things that are temporary and then not ultimately beneficial for us. And so we do that by reminding ourselves about the fact that the life is short, that there is an eternal existence beyond this life. And really the key word, I think, is perspective. I think, just generally speaking, again, people relate to the idea that if you maintain things in perspective, then you are likely to behave in ways that are in your short-term and long-term interest. So I think that what submission to God, belief in God, worship, service, all of these things, just effectively, at the end of the day, mindfulness of God and remembering Him in the context of all aspects of our lives, the way in which that fundamentally benefits us is because it allows us to retain perspective, and actually kind of centers us. And actually, when we come into the Salah discussion, that's effectively one of the roles of Salah, really. I think it's almost like whatever your mood is, wherever you are in your spectrum, in this particular point of the day, Salah has the role of actually reminding you about all of these things that we've just talked about, and centering you again, and just bringing you back into a place that is probably best for your well-being.
Okay, so it's like a reflection, a daily reflection, which you do often. So in the midst of all the rigmarole of life, it brings you back and you reflect on where you are and how trivial your problems might be, or how large they might be, and puts into the wider context of where you're going. And yeah, that's a useful reminder. I think in that sense, it's very similar to what I think philosophers of the past have said. Aristotle and the Greeks, when they talk about the good life, they mention a life of reflection being very important to that. And I think this sinks in quite nicely with that.
Absolutely. And I think reflection, and also I think, significantly, words which I didn't just mention, but I think are critical to this in the context of the good life, is that, I think for me, the good life is the meaningful life, the purposeful life. And so the point being is that nowadays, one could argue, and over time, people are suffering from the lack of having, if you like, a fundamental point, behind their overall existence, and then the different aspects of their activities. They can make immediate, material connections of the cause and effect of why they might do something, and then why that might result, or what their motivations might be. But fundamentally, when the end result of our motivations remains in the material space, if you like, and therefore and remains confined to sort of this world, we necessarily will be ultimately sort of disappointed, to the extent that we build any expectation around it, which obviously we do. And so there's no sense of like, okay, well, what's true anymore, what's real anymore, what actually matters. So I think the good life and sort of the godly life, the good life, and the way in which these sort of things come together for us is the fact that, look, we we can at least we rest assured in our belief and our conviction that there is a fundamental point to all of this. And really, a word which is very commonly used in sort of different contexts, but again, in the context of well-being and people recovering from their traumas, is the idea of a closure. The hereafter, the idea of hereafter, the idea of accountability, the idea of the settlement of like everything that actually took place in this world, the idea of the potential of being rewarded, and the potential of being in the company of God and possibly beholding God himself, if you like. All of this provides the possibility for a sense of closure, like sort of the whole thing comes around. And actually, one thing that's interesting about the idea of the seen and the unseen is the fact that it's like, it's as soon as you die that all of these ghaib sort of matters, if you like, start to become witnessed, start to become seen and experienced in a way that wasn't the case before, until the final point of all of that, which is beholding God himself, right? In a way that obviously, boggles the mind right now. But the idea is, and then you have a kind of, there's a completion, there's a full sort of closure on all that. So I think that's it's holistic. It's holistic, and it's kind of and it's whole as well, right? Yeah. Like, and I think I think that fundamentally that's what, I think there's a connection between the types of content that are being produced nowadays, the types of ways people engage in social media, the way in which all of that is going, limited attention spans, sort of people becoming easily bored, easily distracted. All of these things are all symptoms of this fundamental loss of kind of connection, meaning, purpose, and therefore, instead of good lives, you have a increasing number of bad lives that are being led.
Just want to bring it back to something you actually said, which just struck a chord with me just now. As you mentioned, how the better word instead of worship is service, and you also talked about, I think, because we also mentioned what you asked, what's the purpose of life, and you said living meaningfully as well. And I think using the word service instead of worship makes it more meaningful in some way, because if you think about the word worship, it has a very like Christian connotation, this like in front of the altar and you're just there. And it's not very it's not practical in the day, because most of our lives we're not doing that. We're not engaging in some kind of ritual act. We've got, work to do. We've got kids got school to go to. We've got things to learn, all that kind of stuff. But service is useful because it actually imbues in. You serve when you have a meaning to do so, when there's something you are serving. And then I think this is the distinction here, because the word purpose, I feel like that's a part of meaning, but meaning encapsulates a greater whole. Like if you have a chair has a purpose, but the meaning of a chair is entirely different. Like it maybe incorporates its purpose, but it has aesthetic value, it has all these other things as well. So, and that's a much more nuanced discussion, and it actually improves it as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's no question in that. It's fine.
I know. I thought momentarily about elaborating on the meaning of a chair, but then I thought I don't want to go down that route. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'll just move on then. Okay, let's building on that idea of service again, right? The way we serve different people is depends on our relationship to them. So we serve our parents in a particular way, we serve our children in a different way, our spouses and so on, right? So what is that relationship with God, and how does our service link to that then? Because
sure.
when you understand that relationship and how we relate to God, then it enables service, and that becomes quite clear.
Yes. So look, I think when it comes to us and other human beings, and we talk about serving others, then that's typically dependent on their needs or their wants, right? In fact, even in a sort of a corporate context, or even in sort of, it's the sort of language that's used now for many sort of initiatives, startups, companies, whatever it might be, what are the customer needs and wants, right? And let's go and solve for them, basically, right? Let's put stuff together, produce products, produce services that add value. And what is adding value? Adding value is meeting the needs or wants of the customer. And in a way, you can apply that to your relationship with your parents, spouse, children, friends, clients, customers, whoever it is, basically. what are the needs and wants? Have I understood them? Am I prepared to orient my sort of the choices and decisions not around what I want to do, right, but around what the other requires of me, or requires in general. So then the one who provides excellent service to their parents provides or supports their parents in a way that the parent requires, for their own kind of, for their own kind of progress, well-being, etc., etc.
But God has no needs, right?
Exactly. God has no needs, but he has wants in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, of course, not in a human sense, right? So this is the difference. And that's what I was going to come on to, which is to say, okay, but it's just to emphasize that point, because actually it's a very similar psychology that you're going through. What you're basically saying is, okay, fine. So now you consider God and you think, okay, well, similarly, in some ways, what does God want from me? He doesn't need anything from me, right? But what does he want from me? Now, the reason for why he might want certain things from us, might obviously different from why others may, may obviously other human beings, why they want or need whatever they want or need. But the point being is that he has revealed, if you like, his intent. Okay, so through subsequent scriptures, obviously through the final revelation, the last testament, the Quran, revealed to the final prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have a sense then from reading scripture and engaging with scripture about what he wants from us, in terms of our connection, relationship with him, in terms of what we're supposed to be doing and effectuating within society, right? Starting in the home, starting and then with neighbors, the others who are close to us, and then more broadly speaking, the things that we're supposed to be getting up to. And so that's what providing service is, and so in any kind of and so in the one of the common ways to analogize then between the relationship between the human being and God is like, the subjects and the king, basically, right? And the king and the subjects, the king demands, can explain and may explain what, some of the things that he requires of his subjects. Not every subject is going to necessarily understand that, well, some will, some won't. Some will understand the wisdom, some will have that patience, some won't. But the point being is that ultimately they're all subjects of the king. The king has a view effectively of what the ideal is, right? And then gives us room within which to maneuver, to operate, to think, to make choices, to make mistakes, etc. But the point being, there is parameters and guidelines for us to follow in order for us to kind of sort of manifest, if you like, all these hopefully positive and beneficial, and to prove our loyalty, basically. So what we're trying to do here through that service is demonstrate our loyalty, and that's where then amongst human beings there are various then ranks, right? So just as in this kind of analogy of a king and the subjects, right? You've got the rebels, you've got the sort of the people who are bent on sort of sedition and corruption and causing problems within within the kind of
traitors and so on,
within the realm. But then at the same time you have loyal subjects, simple but loyal, right? You have the king's, if you like, courtiers, those who are close at hand. You have the soldiers, you have the ambassadors, etc., right? And then depending on and all of these, if you like, were looked at in that sense, is all describing the different levels of service that you can provide. So in a sense, what we're trying to do here, and what the various Quranic kind of categories and descriptions of people, also suggest to a degree, is that actually, the higher ranks are conferred upon those who seek to make their lives of devotion. And I think, again, that's where you can start to make a connection between the salah and the rest of your life. I think in some ways what the point of the salah is then is not just to remember God and to connect with him and to worship him and to thank him in those moments, but what it does is provide a platform, or the launch pad, if you like, for the way in which you're going to try to make the whole of your life an offering to him, a devotion to him. And this is actually the key thing. I think many of us in our experience of life, as conscientious Muslims or believers, many people's experiences is that they actually, most of their decisions in life to do with how they spend their time, how they spend their energy, what they do, where to live, blah, 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 all of these things are actually quite worldly in the way in which those decisions are formulated, if you like, or how they're come up with, right? oftentimes, there's not much consideration about what God wants, what's the best kind of life I can lead in that context, etc. There's not maybe much thought given to all of that. Actually, a lot of those choices and decisions are made just actually, just going with the flow of how things are in society.
But could we not argue that, or could one not argue that, let's say I'm migrating to, let's say Scotland, for example, for economics, right? Because um,
Yeah.
I want a better paid job or provide a better standard of living for my family. Is
Yeah.
that not itself in some way imbued with what God wants to kind of is better, like if it's better if a believer is rich or richer or wealthier, you have more
Sure.
financial security, which means you have less stress and you have a healthier, better life in that sense.
Maybe not. I think it depends. But all I'm saying, I'm not. So I think none of these things can be judged by the outcome.
Yeah.
Someone moves from wherever to Scotland, right? For and to start a new life, new job, whatever. You can't judge that by simply knowing the outward facts, right, of what happened. But certainly, there's a big difference between someone who does that, not really consider like who someone who sort of, if you like, incidentally, if you like, is sort of improving their lot and things working out for them and whatever, and in some indirect way, okay, well that's good because God wants good for us, and so but has done so in such a way that doesn't consider. They're not considering the decision in that context. They themselves, in making those decisions and thinking about it, aren't thinking about what's best in what's best for them in the context of their relationship with God as well. What I'm trying to say is that at least there should be what I call like the God filter,
Okay.
put it through that consideration at least, even if it is apparently material, or just purely material or purely sort of mundane or purely kind of, to do with the mechanics of how we function in life. I still think that there is a room and there's a big difference, I think, in the process and in the outcome, depending on whether somebody refers to God, or not in those kind of decisions. So what I mean to say is that you can go through this process. It's about making the whole, so there's the verse which I think summarizes or gives a connection between the salah and the rest of the life and gets us to think about what this whole point, because what is the meaning of قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, that say, indeed, my prayer, my sacrifice, first and foremost, if you like, referring to ritual sacrifice, right? My prayer and my sacrifice, my living and my dying are all for God, Lord of all that exists. So the point is that's a very interesting verse, because when you're looking at Quranic verses, one way to think about the significance of certain things is to imagine that they were omitted, and then to think as to whether it would have made much of a difference, or whether we would have thought something was omitted. It's very common that in certain verses in the Quran, Allah mentions, if you like, these really overarching kind of things that seem to be very comprehensive, and then the same verse mentions specific things that are subsets of those, if almost seemingly unnecessarily, but clearly the idea seems to be an emphasis, or in this case, both an emphasis but as well as a starting point. So the verse could have simply read, قُلْ إِنَّ مَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say, my living and my dying are all for God, Lord of all that exists. That's super comprehensive. It covers pretty much everything because it's living and dying and everything, right? But specifically, salah and sacrifice are mentioned. Salah and ritual sacrifice are mentioned. So it's like these are kind of starting points. And ritual sacrifice obviously denotes, like salah says, you're giving some of you're prepared to give some of your time, right? You're putting some time aside and you're going to devote yourself. Ritual sacrifice says basically you're sacrificing something that is dear to you, right? Especially classically, how it was experienced. It's very different to obviously how we experience it. How it was experienced is like, I've been rearing this kind of cow or sheep or camel or whatever it is for all of this time.
Oh, that's a financial asset back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Financial asset. Absolutely. Exactly. So you're making a big sacrifice. So, and then of course, elsewhere, salah, zakah. So time and money, time and money, time and money. So the point is that here in these two, you give a little bit of time and money, but in your living and your dying, you kind of give all of your time and all of your money. Like, so like you devote all of your therefore decision making, your resources, your energies, your intentions, your motivations. It's all about how do I manifest the best possible service of God, right, on earth. And yes, we need to take care of ourselves, our family, etc., and all of these things. But these things are also, means can quickly become the ends. So all of a sudden, and there are countless, I mean, this is what people are doing, believers and non-believers. I mean, I don't think there's almost no differentiation for most people, which is that these things become the ends in and of themselves. They become the reason for existence, right? Like to take care of my family, to make sure we're all set up, Fine, but literally it becomes especially nowadays, all consuming and all whatever. So you might say, for example, in the example that you gave, and then I'll stop after this point. In the example that you gave, oh, so and so goes to Scotland, can get a better job, can have a better life, can have less, better for their well-being, financial security, less stress. But in most people's or many people's experiences, fine, getting a promotion is more stress. Getting a better job with a higher paying salary is actually more stress. You're working longer, perhaps you might start to affect your relationship at home, which is becomes another cause of stress. I'm not seeing my kids as much as I was before. 10 years down the line, that's another cause of stress, So it's not as simple as, oftentimes I think people, and to all of that, see, now this is the point, and just to round this off, going back to those words, holistic, right? You consider God in the equation, you're going to consider all the different components. You're not just going to be looking at things in this very sort of linear sort of way. You're going to think about what's in my best interest in this life, in the next life, and in a comprehensive way, because there's many different factors, to consider. And I think that's actually what the good life, you said that the good life, philosophers talk about it being a reflection. Well, then exactly. Well, then you'll be reflecting on all of this and then making decisions accordingly.
So in that sense, Salah is a bit like, in tech companies, you have like sprints or agile, right? Agile methodology. You have sprints or scrums and whatnot. In that sense, it's a bit like a retrospective kind of after you've done. Imagine you've got 5 sprints a day, and it's like the retrospective after a sprint where you say, okay, what went well, what didn't go well. It's in a sense, it's unifying. It's providing foundation for the meaning of your life, and it unifies the heart and the actions in that sense. So your heart knows you believe in God and you love God and you want to live in service of Him, but it helps unify the actions outside of Salah, which is what you're doing day to day.
Absolutely. What this is all about, I think, and what we've been speaking about so far, is about establishing a consistency in terms of how we're functioning, right? And so when and all of this is part and parcel of the good life. You see, and this is where the worship and service of God liberates one. Oftentimes from a slogan perspective, we say, Islam is freedom, basically, right? Yeah. It's like that gives you true freedom is in, people will say true freedom is in servanthood to God, but and sometimes it's given in it's communicated, maybe understood in ways that aren't particularly deep, but I do think that I think there's truth obviously in those statements, and it's worth understanding and exploring that, I think, because the whole point is, and the whole point of avoiding things like, say the idea of shirk, which is like the thing that is to be fundamentally avoided at all times, is to ascribe partners to God. Now, obviously, in our mind, oftentimes we're just associating that with kind of blatant idolatry, in front of statues and this and that, whatever. But actually, fundamentally, shirk is about putting anything on a pedestal besides God, or even beyond Him or above Him. Okay. Now, whilst we may differentiate between minor and major forms of shirk and all this kind of stuff, leaving aside all of that technical discussion, the point is in people's lived experiences on a day-to-day basis, the vast majority of people are making their decisions on a day-to-day basis out of fear or respect or love for other than God. Yeah. And frankly, that includes tons of Muslims as well, or believers, or whoever, right, claims to believe in God or whatever, right? And a very basic example, bringing it back to the Salah, is someone who abandons their prayer during the working day, but then prays it later on, perhaps, or maybe not at all, but prays later on. But the person who normally otherwise would have prayed, but doesn't pray during the working day because it's inconvenient for them, because it might look bad, because they're afraid of it raising it in the workplace. It's very common. This is extremely common. Yeah, that a Muslim will not pray during the working day, especially if they're in the office environment, whatever. So what's holding them back? There's some form of fear, right? But because of fear of, I don't know, like whatever, either looking bad, and sometimes funny thing about, fear, it's not that funny, but, that's like in sort of a non-humorous or funny way, right? The thing about fear is that, like, oftentimes it's 1,000 times worse in our head than it would be in reality. So people who actually tend to have the conversation with whoever at work, for example, to say, look, as a believer, I offer prayers within fixed times, and I will just need to take time out. So, I'm not disappearing off to the toilet every 5 seconds. I just need, I'm going to, to the just to offer my kind of offer my prayers, and that's part and parcel of what I need to do, and just to accommodate around that and negotiate around that. And sometimes, practically that's required. I remember having to do that myself, in my early career when I was working in investment banking for a few years. and I was a very busy environment, etc., etc. And I didn't used to miss my prayers, and I know that, so I know that it's possible because that's one of the more intense environments probably that exists in the context of the working life. The point being is that, that's what it is. So it's about, like you said, it's about bringing that consistency into all of your decision making, making your loyalty and devotion to God true in all situations, right? You can be in the shopping center, you can be in the jungle, you can be at home, you can be in the workplace, you can be on the sky, you can be on earth. It doesn't really matter. The point is, he's still there, you're still there, and as long as he's still there and you're still there, like, you still owe him to live in such a way that puts him as number one all the time, through those devotional acts and outside of those specific devotional acts as well. And all of that kind of synergizes with each other. And that gives you a sense of clarity, and it liberates you, therefore, from behaving or deciding or doing stuff out of fear of anybody else, or a disproportionate or inappropriate level of devotion or love for anybody else. But that's what people are doing. People who are following influencers in ways where they suspend their own kind of judgment and lead them down kind of, perhaps ways that are, harmful for them. Or even, frankly, the way in which we put even, for example, sometimes we put scholars or teachers on pedestals as well, right? And develop sort of almost like a cultish type of, approach to the way in which we develop, and all of the different. I mean, even amongst us as believers, most of our divisions are as a result of exactly this kind of behavior. Yeah, where we sort of we've can't see the wood from the trees anymore, and what seems to matter is, we have a very tribal sort of approach. So we suffer from, as proclaimed Muslims or those who submit to God, we suffer from all of the same stuff that everybody else suffers from, and we do so to the extent that we are as forgetful of God in truth as others are. But to the extent that we're truly God conscious, then we will experience the benefits, some of the benefits that we've discussed.
Yeah, and I can see when you frame Salah in this way, it actually raises the standard of of living in the sense that if you're cognizant of your prayer and you understand this is a reflection of where you're going and who you are and where you're standing and who your Lord is, after the Salah finishes, those thoughts, I mean, they don't just go away. It's not like a ritual, which is, it's over now, close the book. That carries on, that kind of I don't know how to describe it, but it's like that zeal, or that standard carries on. Like, okay, you've just talked to God, you've said this is where I'm going, and because you factor that into your decision making, that allows you to, I think, be more productive in some sense, work harder, lays around less. And I think it's similar to the hadith of the Prophet who talks about, if you pray 5 times a day, you'll be clean. In some sense, if you pray 5 times a day, you'll also waste less time. You'll be more cognizant. You'll just, I think, be a better human being overall.
Absolutely. And one of the analogies I give for the Salah, because I like to use analogies all the time, just to kind of help people just normalize things, right, and just understand things in a natural way. But one of the analogies I give for Salah is like checking in with your boss at work. Yeah. So you're employed by this company. Within this company, you have the hierarchy. You have a responsibility or an accountability towards, one or perhaps more other individuals. And every so often you have like a review meeting, and that might be informal. Sometimes it might be like formal, but you're checking in. Yeah. Like, it might be just to check on the direction of stuff. It might be just to receive new instructions. It might be because he's called you in because, to say whatever he has to say. What's interesting is that for anybody who's experienced a kind of review meeting or a performance review, or even an informal check-in or chat with one's say superior at work, then like exactly as you said, the results or the residual effect of that meeting is supposed to continue beyond the meeting. Yeah. Right? You are then supposed to leave that meeting and operate or function in a way that is aligned with what happened in that meeting. Now, as far as the Salah is concerned, what should be happening is that it should be a positive meeting and with positive results, right? And so that you are actually aligning your behaviors after the Salah with the words that you were saying in your Salah. The implication of the words and the movements of the prayer should be continuing after the prayer. What's the point in constantly asking for guidance if we almost go out of our way to act in ways that are clearly misguided? Mm-hmm. What's the point in keep saying that, you alone we serve, when actually, as soon as we finish the prayer, we go off and actually, again, we've committed all these forms of, say, minor shirk by putting everything or lots of other things on pedestals, and they become our sort of mini gods, all of a sudden, right? So what's the, so it's not, so you lose that consciousness. So it's a little bit like then somebody who goes into that meeting with the boss at work, comes out of that meeting, but then continues to mess around, ignores the instructions, doesn't really take it seriously, etc. Eventually that person will be what? Fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pun intended. Right. Pun intended. So the point is a similar thing. It's a similar thing, right? Eventually the person keeps rebelling, keeps rebelling, keeps rebelling. Well, the potential of punishment through being fired is there, right? Whereas the person who, for example, uses that, has a positive meeting and interaction at work, comes out, seeks to improve their standards, seeks to create new opportunities, seeks to do things to please the boss. I mean, that's literally what people are doing, right? Pursuing the pleasure of their superiors, etc. They want to be recognized, they want to be rewarded, right? These are all the terminologies that are being used in the workplace to describe like motivation and how your performance management and getting the best out of your team and all this stuff, right? And finally enough, the final point on this is that they talk about the especially nowadays, it seems to be more more discussed in recent times about one of the best ways to motivate the team is obviously to give everybody like this great big why, right? Great big sense of kind of vision, motivation, direction, etc. Give them a sense of purpose and meaning. And nowadays, I've heard it said a lot, the last couple of years that graduates of today or younger people of today, they're looking for more of this connection, purpose, whatever in their work. Yeah, because it's this kind of it's wired into us to seek that sort of anchor point, if you like. And where we don't find it, we become distressed, we're a little bit lost at sea, sort of thing. But it's just interesting that all of these same type of and so I like to think about this. Like people ask, if someone was to ask me, who do you work for? I just like to say I work for God. I like to see myself as being employed by him. Right? I'm employed by him. He's my boss. I have instructions. I have a situation. Like, go figure. And actually, he's not getting too specific with me about this way, that way. I'd have to figure out like what the best way. He's actually been quite open. There's lots of different possibilities. I've just got to figure out what's the best that I can do. But I have to see it as I'm employed by him, and every day I'll check in with him. And that's how I see it. And you see it like that, it's quite powerful.
It is very powerful. Because we have to pray 5 times a day, and our emotions change. We go through different circumstances. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes, especially at Fajr time, and in the summer Isha, our brains are gone. It's so late. How do you keep that kind of consciousness or cognizance alive, and so that your salah is purposeful and meaningful? Because when you do something so many times again, it's very easy to zone out. It's very easy for the ball to slip.
Yes. I think that so I've divided this into sort of two things, broadly speaking. I think most of what needs to be done to maintain the freshness of the prayer, if you like. I think, okay, well, maybe viewers or listeners should sort of understand this much, at least understand in principle that it is possible to pray consistently 5 times a day, and for those prayers not to feel repetitive, for them not to feel like routine, for them not to feel so you actually feel like even in times when it's quite constrained or what have you, right? So then that possibility comes, I think, from two things. So outside of the prayer, it's that almost, again, coming back to the discussion of what are we doing outside of the prayer? How are we developing a relationship? How are we coming back to what we discussed right at the beginning? How are we actually coming to know God better or increase our appreciation, knowledge, and understanding of him in ways that almost then allow for, like, it's almost like the more you expand your sort of mind and heart to appreciate more of who God is, his wisdoms and his ways, then that gives you more almost what's the word, like, not ingredients, but more it's just more of a kind of motivation or more of a way to sort of bring new dimensions to your salah, if you like, right? Because you see, if our ability to, like, if we had an example where you have to write down everything you understand about God, right? And let's say we have to repeat this every year. And if every year that we did this exercise, like, you got the same output, probably your prayers are not going to have changed much as well in the meantime. Whereas actually, if year upon year, owing to your reflection, your engagement with revelation, your consideration about life and you're thinking purposefully and you're trying to construct or think through things meaningfully and purposefully all the time, your appreciation is going to be expanding. As your appreciation expands, your salah as a manifestation of your appreciation in part and remembrance, etc., will also expand. Your appreciation, and that the greater your sense of perspective. If you feel bored in your salah or to do your salah, it's because you've lost perspective. It's because you suddenly think there's something else that actually is more important. And there might be things that outside of salah are definitely important and all part of that ibadah, all part of that worship and service. But even for somebody who is kind of gets their buzz or their thrill or their kind of their meaning and their purposefulness from that, if you like, the wider engagement and their work, in society and what have you, there's still nothing better than that private, intimate moment with your Lord when there's no one else involved.
Yeah,
you see, it's true. And so that I think is really important, and it's important for us to understand. So I think that just generally outside of the prayer, it's like your engagement with revelation in a way that's meaningful and in the way that's trying to contextualize. And I think this is the key thing. Like a lot of us, we do this kind of our Quran stuff and our Islam and whatever in sort of abstract. We're not doing it in kind of context. We have, our mind sort of switches gears into a different whole frame for our Islam. And then when it comes to this world, we kind of think in a whole different way. We've got to apply a sort of a consistent way of understanding all of these things. And that also helps because it helps to normalize the salah as well. Now, when it comes, then there's some kind of, things that we can do. I think that our sort of call it a mini ritual, preparatory ritual before the prayer, if you like, is quite important, or will determine how the prayer itself goes. So actually taking the time to almost refresh ourselves, literally refresh ourselves with the wudu. And this is why, by the way, wudu is also part of the reason why wudu is also encouraged, even if you are technically in a state of wudu, because the real purpose of the wudu is to purify your inner self. It provides that buffer between whatever else has been going on and the salah and now the salah. And it's almost like a respectful form of self-preparation. Okay. And then taking the time immediately before the salah, just to think about what you're about to do, not to rush in. Clearly, and there's another big discussion, obviously, but just to summarize it, like, we need to question and ask ourselves, do we know what we're saying in our prayer? Are we expressing what we're saying in our prayer with a tone and in a manner that, like, it sounds like it's a genuine communication with the real being that we actually believe is there and, watching us, if you like, and a part of that engagement. So there's all of these different things that I think need to happen. So it's to keep the salah dynamic, you need a dynamic relationship overall. Right? It's a little bit like, someone's marriage is suffering. Okay. When they have the opportunity for one-to-one interaction with their spouse, it's a bit flat, basically. There's not a lot going on there. So if you want to diagnose the problem, you're gonna have to say, well, what else is going on in this marriage? Like, what's the basis of your understanding even? You actually need to kind of go quite deep, potentially, into thinking, like, how did this all come together? What are we even trying to do here? Why are we, you have to explore all this stuff. All of that broad exploration over time is going to help support the quality of those, if you like, the one-to-one interactions, and the meetings and conversations, etc. So it's the same. It's fundamentally the same relationship building principles that apply.
Yeah. So my best salahs have been when I'm kind of imagining I'm in a throne room in front of a king, and kind of the reverence that demands. I think that helps me kind of get into the a bit of, in some sense, it's a kind of a role play situation where I'm imagining there's a king in front of me. I'm just someone having an audience with the king.
Yes.
Back in the medieval times, and I think that helps me quite a lot. Get my emotions in check and so on. This has been a useful discussion because I used to think about, okay, why pray 5 times a day, and like, if God doesn't get anything from it, what are we getting from it? And one of the verse which comes to mind now is at the end of Surah Nur. I can't remember the exact translation, but it says something like, those who believe and do good deeds and keep up the prayer and pray the prescribed alms, we will make them successors of the earth, just like those who became before them. So I think it's referring to like the Jewish kingdoms. And as my question, like, I was thinking, how does prayer and giving charity and so on, how does that make you inheritors of the earth, i.e. conquerors in some sense? How does God give you, make you the kings of the, make you Muslims a supreme empire effectively? Because that's what also happened. It's God sent his message to the most ignorant people on earth, the Arabs, you could say, steeped in superstition, and somehow they're the ruling empire of the world. And I think framing Salah in this way actually helps me see that, because if you're cognizant in your prayers, you align the purpose of life to what you're doing day to day as well, 5 times a day. And if that raises the bar of everything you do, so you do things with a degree of excellence that you might not otherwise have done so. And a civilization who does that will flourish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think so. The verses are. I know these verses well. So they're verses 55 and 56 from Surah An-Nur, which is chapter 24. So the verses go, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. So Allah promises those who believe from among you and those who do righteous deeds. لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. That he will most certainly give them authority on earth as he did to those before them. وَلَيُمَكِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ دِينَهُمْ الَّذِي ارْتَضَىٰ لَهُمْ. He will most certainly establish for them their deen, which he has chosen for them. وَلَيُبَدِّلَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِمْ أَمْنًا. And he will replace their sense of fearfulness for a sense of peace and security. يَعْبُدُونَنِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا. They worship and serve me. So the same concept we went back. وَلَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا. And they don't ascribe anything to me whatsoever. So both of those we've talked about, right? This purity in your devotion, your service, etc. وَمَنْ كَفَرَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Whoever, if you like, rebels or denies after that, well, those are the ones who are the defiant. Then وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Establish prayer, give zakah, and obey the messenger so that you will receive mercy. You will receive this mercy. So these two are kind of connected. The idea is exactly as you said. Allah promises 3 entirely worldly outcomes. Of course, yeah, these are all in this world. Some sort of authority on earth, influence. I like to use the word influence because people, there's not to get into this, but there's like a kind of there's a clear when we think, if we say the word khilafa, right, we have a very particular, or some people have a very particular idea of what exactly that means. Fundamentally, the word here, la yastakhlifannahum fil ard, they will be given that authority. Now, the exact form of that, how that will be the case, that's
we can say it's a role of stewardship, responsibility.
Stewardship, yeah, stewardship. I think there's this idea of stewardship, but it's almost like but it is something about that establishment as well. You've got, basically you have influence. And I think influence is a better word, and even in contemporary terms, as we try to engage with the revelation, is perhaps a better way for us to understand it, this verse, because nowadays influence is not just come from political authority.
It's corporate as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of now. I mean, arguably, there's obviously all this social media, whatever, right? There's the certain ways of influence are many nowadays. It's not as structured and top down as it once was. It's quite distributed, which actually gives us more of an opportunity to be people of influence, obviously, even if you don't have power as such, that kind of power or position. And then he will establish their deen, and he will give them that sense of peace and security rather than fearfulness. And then he mentions salah, zakah, etc. Look, fundamentally, I think, okay, what is the establishing the prayer? What does it do for us? What qualities does it bring about? It demonstrates devotion. It gives us a sense of energy and zeal, the word you mentioned earlier, which is a nice word to describe how one would feel after the prayer if they have basically prayed properly. And it gives you perspective. And fundamentally, in the end, it makes you fearless. There's one scholar I remember listening to their words, and they were saying that actually, we forget that the prostration that we offer to our Lord is a position that we put ourselves in front of him, that we wouldn't put ourselves in front of anybody else. That in and of itself should give us, like, the prostration that we offer to Allah in and of itself, if we understood its significance, is precisely the thing that should give us a confidence to say that I'm not, I prostrate to him. I don't prostrate to anybody else. I'm not subservient to anyone or anything else. So therefore, it gives you a confidence with which to engage, right, in the social realm, which we lack. Like we have a severe lack of confidence, I think, that comes from a lack of knowledge and understanding, but just generally that we've been sort of battered around for a long time. So we just have a collective lack of confidence in what we believe, who we are, and where that confidence is displayed. It's often displayed in ways that are again a bit tribal and not very universal, not very appealing, to others, which again is something would be a loss of what our kind of purpose is. So I think that when you have if Salah gives you purpose and meaning, and it gives you a sense of fearlessness, and gives you a sense of confidence, well, these are the ingredients. These are the ingredients for success. You see, I mean, there's a famous book called From Good to Great that's written by this Jim Collins. It's one of these multi-million best-selling business books, right? He talks about this idea of level 5 leadership. Level 5 leadership being this combination of extreme humility and extreme determination. And he says that, in their part of their research that they did in all the successful companies, et cetera, the leaders of those companies, extremely humble, open-minded, happy to be receive information from different sources, not kind of not egotistical, etc. Extremely humble, but extremely determined, very mission-oriented. It wasn't about them, about the mission. And because of that fact, they were very, they were open-minded, they were humble. And it was all about happy to iterate, happy to move forward, to keep trying and getting to where they wanted to get to.
Something the Prophet exemplified, yeah.
And all of those, and basically the ones that the ones who were around him, and the ones who went out and did what they did subsequently. So you talk about how did these kind of what were ignorant, superstitious, very inward looking sort of Arabs, how did they go from here to here through the process of cultivation of revelation with the messenger's guidance and leadership, etc. You get to a stage where now what came subsequently was fearlessness, was belief, conviction, and fearlessness. And that's basically what you get. Now, the point is, when we display these qualities, we will be given given success. Allah talks about the fact that it is the believer's right upon him that he should grant them success and save them from harm. Yeah. In another verse, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Don't be afraid. Don't be sort of weak-hearted. Don't be afraid. Don't, grieve, if you like, over what has gone. You will be on the ascendancy. You will be uppermost if only you're truly believers, So, and the conditions of belief, of course, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Not necessarily the conditions, but the qualities, right? Like successful indeed are the believers, and then those who will have khushu', those who have humility in their prayers, who stay away from false speech, etc., etc., etc. And then again mentions, those who guard their prayers, preserve their prayers. So there's a lot to this in terms of absolutely, and to draw the connection between, initially when someone thinks, okay, hang on, the connection between salah, my namaz that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, okay, and this kind of like grand ideas of, worldly success, establishment, and actually having a community that is just very strong and just appealing, and frankly, one that looks like it's worth joining. It's hard to initially it's hard to make the connection, but often that's because of the way we've understood and experienced the salah. But fundamentally, there's a very, very core connection. And actually, these couple of verses are just one of many that show that make that kind of connection. And there's a zakah part of it as well, because you're basically putting your money as well. So it's about your time, energy, and your resources, and how you bring all of these together to move your mission, your agenda forward.